body and grinding down the
Okay, we'll start with this. Ahead of what is to be his big showdown with Gervonta Davis, what's supposed to be Gervonta Davis's final fight under his existing Mayweather Promotions contract, Romero stated, "I don't give a fuck about Undisputed. I want to be a pay-per-view star." Retard. He's quoted as saying, "I don't really give a fuck about that. I want to be a pay-per-view star. That's what matters in this sport. If you ain't filling seats, you don't matter." It's true. It's half true. It's a half truth. Well, George and Devin are filling more seats in the land down under at Marvel Stadium. And Gervonta Davis and Romero are set to fill at the Barclays. It is true that if you ain't putting asses in the seats, it's very easy to fall through the cracks in this sport.
So how do you put asses in the seats?
Well, you can start by fighting in fights that people actually want to see. Fights they actually want to see you in. You have to capture their imagination. One way you can do that is by setting yourself apart from the rest.
By proving that you're the best of the best.
Not settling on being the next best or just one of the best of the rest.
Surely you just.
Rolly hasn't proven anything. And the only reason he's actually getting this Gervonta Davis fight, Gervonta Davis, who we all have to admit, has more key value than Romero. The only reason Rolly's getting this fight is because Mayweather Promotions insists on keeping everything in-house. Romero is an in-house fighter. According to Gervonta Davis, the only reason he's even fighting this guy is because this is the final fight of his Mayweather Promotions contract.
That and the WBA just so happened to order it.
This qualifies as a title defense of Gervonta Davis's secondary WBA title. Two guys that don't care about becoming undisputed champions. Two guys that don't care about belts are essentially fighting for a belt, being ordered to fight for one. Secondary one, I should say.
It's a fucking clown show.
You don't get to become that big pay-per-view attraction, that pay-per-view star, unless you just so happen to be a legacy fighter, because you tell me what pay-per-view star, what pay-per-view attraction.
Which one of them was an underachiever?
Which one? Name me some. Was it Oscar? Was it Manny? Was it Floyd? Was it Canelo? Which one of those guys settled on just having a secondary title?
There are certain common denominators between all of those fighters.
And there are common denominators when it comes to the biggest box office draws in the sport. The legacy fighters, as it were.
The guys that put asses in the seats?
The guys who historically ended up making the most money in the sport of boxing. There were common denominators between them, and Rolly don't fit the bill. If he's not ambitious here and now at 26 years old, he's never gonna be.
He's supposed to be entering into what are his prime years.
It's supposed to be the beginning of his best years as a boxer, as an athlete, and this ain't the kind of talk you're supposed to be hearing from a guy this age, this very perverse take on what it takes to become a box office draw in the sport of boxing. You've got to fight in the big fights, you've got
This fight with Gervonta Davis ain't a big fight.
It's not a big fight by any stretch of the imagination. Just because they stuck it on pay-per-view doesn't make it a big fight. You'll be surprised what ends up on pay-per-view these days. It's not a big Vegas fight. It's happening at the Barclays in Brooklyn.
It's not a stadium fight. Haney versus Kambosos is a stadium fight.
More people will be in attendance for Kambosos versus Haney than Davis versus Romero.
Stop me when I tell a lie.
Let me let you in on a little secret. Legacy and finance aren't mutually exclusive in the sport of boxing. In fact, legacy and being a legacy fighter leads to finance, leads to big prices, big fights, and big paydays. Lots of asses and lots of seats. It's those kinds of fights, those kinds of fighters that end up being the top earners in the sport.
That guy's satisfied with fighting for secondary titles.
Perhaps Romero's morbid take on what matters most in the sport of boxing is a window into his mind, an insight. Perhaps he doubts himself, knows his limitations, and he knows he ain't got what it takes to go all the way anyway.
So why would he care about becoming an undisputed champion?
Perhaps that's the case. Perhaps he has a skewed view of what it takes to make it in the sport of boxing, to be great and make great purses, because he's looking at the end result.
He's looking at the end result of a guy like Floyd.
Without highlighting what it takes to make it there.
Look, we all know that Floyd loves money.
It's what matters most to him, but even Floyd, Well, he wasn't an underachiever, I can tell you that much. He was a gym rat.
Him, Oscar, Manny, Cotto, Canelo.
They were all full-fledged, multi-weight champions in several weight classes. They fought the big fights, the risky ones, made a lot of fucking money in doing so because it was those fights that captured the audience's attention, put those asses in those seats, and you don't get there.
When you say things like, you don't care about becoming an undisputed champion.
Well, that tells paying public everything they need to know about you, your career.
But hey, who was expecting Romero to become a big box office draw anyway?
Gervonta Davis should be insulted that this is the best Mayweather Promotions could conjure up for him. And perhaps he is. Perhaps that's why there's all this talk of him leaving the Mayweather Promotions outfit. Maybe that's the case.
Yeah, Rolly's talking like this is in any way a bigger fight than Haney versus Kambosos. It's not.
It's not a bigger fight than Haney versus Kambosos in any way. Not in terms of legacy and relevance, prestige, certainly not in terms of finance. That's a stadium fight. This fight's happening at the Barclays.
What, are you stupid or something?
Where do you get that you're going to become this big box office draw with this minimalist approach to boxing? It doesn't work like that.
Who cares? It's Rolly Romero, for God's sake.
In men's middleweight news, we are seeing the first images of Gennady Golovkin alongside Ryota Murata, the two champions, the two middleweight champions ahead of their big clash this weekend.
The
wee hours of the morning here stateside, Saturday morning, half a world away.
Serious questions hanging over the heads of both of these fighters.
Golovkin looking a far cry from Kazakh Thunder, as he used to be called in his heyday.
More like a slight drizzle these days.
Very statuesque, Ryota Murata. You can notice the difference in size, difference in age as well. Ryota Murata is about 3 or 4 years younger than Gennady Golovkin, though 2 times as inactive.
Hasn't boxed since December of 2019.
Scored a 5th-round TKO stoppage over Canadia's own Stephen Butler way back when. Serious questions over Ryota Murata's head as well, because in spite of being the bigger and younger guy, he's 2 times as inactive, not as experienced. He still had bones to make as a professional when we last saw him. Look, Ryota Murata's a good fighter. He is.
He's all right.
At least he has the potential to be.
But he's robotic.
Decent fundamentals, a strong puncher, a good jab with a good right hand, but he's predictable.
He's robotic.
Doesn't have the fastest feet, doesn't have the fastest hands. Good-sized punch, though.
Though he's not the most prolific puncher.
He only throws 1 or 2 shots at a time, punches in sequence, waits for his turn to throw.
It's a big part of the reason he lost the first Rob Brandt fight.
Rob Brandt, comparatively, is a busier puncher. He throws combinations, whereas Ryota Murata, he's only throwing 1 or 2 shots at a time. He's looking to inflict damage off of those 1 or 2 shots, but he can be outworked. He can be out-hustled.
That's why he lost the first fight and showed more initiative in the second.
Yeah, he was thrown with bad intentions in the rematch, though all the same, Ryota Murata isn't an, according to Hoyle, combination puncher. He's a puncher because he has a punch, a big punch, but he's not a busy guy.
Like any fighter, if he can get the guy hurt, he's going to pour it on.
If he can get the guy hurt, he's going to let his hands go, though. Leading up to that point, he's not what one would describe as all that busy.
Yeah, Gennady Golovkin's a more prolific puncher than Ryota Murata.
And not just when he gets the guy hurt. Throughout the course of the fight,
Gennady's busier.
Even though I'm not quite sure what I'm going to get from Gennady Golovkin the night of the fight, having been such a long time since last we saw him, and you know, he's with Jonathan Banks these days. He's not with Abel Sanchez anymore, so he may not be the Golovkin now that made him famous.
There may be some slight differences, better still.
If history is any indicator of things to come, both Gennady Golovkin and Ryota Murata are heavy-handed guys, heavy-handed punchers, but Golovkin does have more nuance than Ryota Murata does, comparatively, and he is a busier guy, a busier puncher.
Busier with the jab, and he shows more variety.
Neither guy's ever been stopped, though there is a first time for everything, to my knowledge. Neither Gennady Golovkin or Ryota Murata. Neither guy has ever been down, neither guy has ever been out.
I reiterate, there's a first time for everything.
Yeah, I do think one of these guys is going to get knocked out Saturday morning, Saturday night, if you're in the land of the rising sun. I think one of these guys, they're going to hit the deck. And I think the guy that's going to hit the deck is Ryota Murata. I think it's going to be Ryota Murata because they're both coming off the long stints of inactivity, so they're on an even playing field when it comes to that. Ryota's just not as busy a puncher, and his shots are a lot wider than Gennady Golovkin's.
They're not as compact.
Not as defensible, and because Ryota Murata doesn't have a varying attack, to hit a guy with shots that perhaps he doesn't see, it seems to me that Gennady might figure him out before Ryota.
Ryota Murata's best bet is to throw so much at Gennady Golovkin early that he overwhelms the old man.
But because Ryota Murata's a 1-2 kind of fighter, a predictable guy, bit robotic, not the most prolific puncher. I mean, if you're Ryota Murata and you're in there with a 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin, a guy who's got some cobwebs of his own that he needs to shake off, it behooves you to get off to a fast start so you can make the old guy feel like an old guy before he gets settled in. The problem is, Ryota's got his own cobwebs to shake off. He's been out longer than Gennady.
So we can't bank on him getting off to a fast start.
Do I think that Ryota Murata packs a big enough punch to where he could actually hurt Gennady?
Yes.
So is he as good as Gennady is at delivering his power?
No.
No, don't. I know it's hard to trust a 40-year-old fighter that hasn't seen action in a little over 12 months. But it's even harder for me to trust an even more inactive fighter that's more inexperienced.
It's harder for me to trust Ryota Murata than it is for me to trust Gennady Golovkin.
For me, Ryota Murata's 2-year hiatus from the sport, his 2-year absence from the ring, it's almost inexcusable. I mean, Gennady Golovkin has made his money, you understand. He made buckets, and I mean buckets of cash, in that Steve Rolls fight, which was his first fight on the DAZN platform, the Sergey Dedevianchenko fight, the Kamil Zeremata fight. He already made buckets of cash with Canelo Alvarez in their 2 fights and his 2 pay-per-views.
Gennady already made a name for himself, and he made his money.
But Ryota Murata, I mean, he was 33 years old when last we saw him. He's 36 now.
When he was first coming out of the amateurs, I had high hopes for this kid.
I expected more. Now what I expect is that Gennady Golovkin is going to splatter Ryota Murata in about, 7 or 8 rounds. Ryota's a big guy, young, tough, never been stopped before, never been dropped, to my knowledge.
There's a first time for everything.
Yeah, I think Golovkin's going to stop him. That's the logical choice.
If he does, he might find himself reintegrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list.
Here's why. George Kambosos Jr., the lightweight division's
Unified
lineal, Ring Magazine, and unified champion. He's only actually ever beaten one active reigning world champion, Teofimo Lopez, and the only real reason he's on this list is per the rules that govern the list. In defeating a pound-for-pound fighter, you become one yourself. He beat Teofimo Lopez, who beat Vasyl Lomachenko before him.
Based on that same rule, all those guys earned the rank.
But what they didn't earn was a top spot. Because Teofimo Lopez's body of work was not as robust and not as complete as Vasyl Lomachenko's, 3-division champion. Because of this, Teofimo didn't emerge in the top 5.
No, he emerged in the bottom tier.
And so did George when he beat him. George Kambosos Jr. currently ranks in the number 10 spot. He is in the most danger of being bumped off. Should Gennady Golovkin win this weekend, he will be in possession of the same number of alphabet titles as George Kambosos Jr., being a more accomplished fighter, more decorated, having beat at least one more active reigning world champion than George has. 2015, Gennady Golovkin pried the IBF title away from the then reigning IBF middleweight champion, David Lemieux.
And if he beats Ryota Murata this weekend, that makes 2.
2 active reigning world champions that Gennady Golovkin has beat. To George Kambosos Jr.'s is 1.
Because he only ever beat one active reigning world champion.
Gennady will have beaten 2, having had several successful title defenses in the middleweight division, leading up to the Canelo Alvarez showdown.
All of this put together strengthens his argument.
Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that George is going to get bumped off the list.
It doesn't.
What it does mean is that Gennady Golovkin's argument is better than George's.
That he's worthy of a rank.
If he wins, he is. Though if he is worthy, where would he emerge should he win on Saturday? I'll tell you where.
There's no vacancy.
Oh, there isn't? Juan Francisco Estrada has not boxed since March of last year, and that way, it's been a year's time since this guy had a fight, and
Well, I don't know about your list or somebody else's, but on mine.
inactivity weakens a fighter's argument to maintain a rank on this list.
Well, all the guys around you, they either fought or have fights coming up.
Whereas the most news Juan Francisco Estrada has made is pulling out of that Chocolatito trilogy. Their third fight was supposed to be their third fight due to what were reported as COVID symptoms.
He hasn't boxed in the last 12 months.
He hasn't. And should Gennady Golovkin win on Saturday, he'll have a decent enough argument that Juan Francisco might be out and Gennady might be in. Now, if it happens the other way, if Ryota Murata shocks the world, he won't be integrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, as Gennady would be the first and only world champion he will have fought.
It's just not a strong enough argument. Not if Ryota Murata wins.
If he were to beat Gennady Golovkin and defend those 3 alphabet titles a few times, that would strengthen his argument. That would count towards him getting a rank. But if he wins...
If he wins on Saturday, that doesn't make him a shoo-in to get a rank.
Not straight away, not just like that, just some things to think about. We already know that Canelo Alvarez's trainer and manager, Eddie Reynoso, has stated that if they get past Dmitry Bivol, but Gennady Golovkin loses to Ryota Murata, then they will pursue a light heavyweight undisputed fight with the winner of Artur Beterbiev versus Joe Smith Jr. We talked about that.
In my previous video.
The outcome of Saturday's fight could greatly affect what happens moving forward for more fighters. than just one, 4 more weight classes than just the middleweight division.
If Golovkin loses, he's not going to come back down to super middleweight to fight him.
He's going to stay at light heavyweight and pursue the winner of Beterbiev versus Smith. The winner of that fight, regardless of who it is a top-ranked fighter.
That brings Bob into the picture.
In my previous video, we talked about Bob Arum's aversion to DAZN doing that fight.
The usual stuff, nobody watches.
It's just an app that doesn't have any subscribers, yada, 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 the usual stuff.
You all know what Bob's real agenda is.
He doesn't want to send the winner of that fight across the street, send their business over there to be content for DAZN. Far from it. He'd want that fight to happen on the top-ranked ESPN side of things. And the question is, could Bob Arum and Top Rank be a hindrance to a potential undisputed light heavyweight title fight? It's a legitimate question because if nothing else, we know DAZN is going to want to bring that fight over to their side of things. They're going to want to do it. Because of that, they're going to make the winner of that fight an offer.
A generous offer.
So could Bob Arum be an issue? Bob Arum and Top Rank, will they stand in the way of that fight taking place, that fight happening?
Because DAZN's going to make an offer to do the fight.
And it's conceivable that so will Top Rank.
They're going to be in play to do that fight also because it involves one of their fighters.
Not very many people expected that Top Rank and ESPN would sweep the rug from under Eddie Hearn and Matchroom for the George Kambosos versus Devin Haney lightweight showdown. Not many people expected Top Rank.
Nah, they didn't expect that Devin Haney was going to go over there.
But that's the way it happened. Could the same ring true for Canelo Alvarez? What was supposed to be a 2-fight deal for Canelo with Matchroom, could that turn into Canelo crossing over to the Top Rank ESPN side of things if he beats Dmitry Bivol?
That is, if Murata beats Golovkin.
And Canelo beats Dmitry.
It's a possibility we have to entertain.
Listen, Matchroom got beat out by Frank Warren for the rights to Fury versus White, and very recently they didn't get the rights for Haney versus Kambosos either. It's not a guarantee. It's not a lock. It's not set in stone that Matchroom.
It's not set in stone that Canelo versus the winner of that fight has to happen on the Matchroom DAZN side of things.
Bob doesn't want it to happen there for obvious reasons. It doesn't benefit him, doesn't benefit his company, Top Rank, or his network affiliate, ESPN. He wants to bring that viewership to his side of things.
For the winner of Beterbiev versus Smith, there's an obvious financial incentive associated with that fight.
Regardless of where the fight lands, and where the fight lands is inconsequential to me, the consumer.
DAZN, ESPN makes no difference. Either way, it'll be billed as a pay-per-view.
Though for existing DAZN subscribers, it will be at a slightly reduced price than it would be on ESPN.
That's a genuine possibility you have to consider.
Bob isn't just going to send one of his guys over there to be content for Eddie. It doesn't work like that.
Just something to think about.